Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. For about a year, I lived in a shared house with 4 other people. It was one of those places that never really felt fully organized, but after a while, you stopped noticing that. Everyone had their own routines, their own habits, and over time, everything just blended together into something that felt normal, even if it wasn't perfect. There were dishes sometimes left too long, people coming and going at odd hours, music from one room while someone else was trying to sleep. It was chaotic in a quiet, familiar way, the kind of environment you get used to without realizing it. The house itself was fairly big, and one of the things that stood out the most about it was the backyard. It wasn't just a small patch of grass. It stretched out further than you would expect, almost like it didn't belong to a shared house at all. At the far end, there was a garage, and just beyond that, a separate tool shed. The tool shed was strange, not because of how it looked, but because of how it existed. None of us ever used it, not once. No one stored anything there. No one checked it. No one even really talked about it. It was just there, sitting quietly at the back of the yard like part of the scenery. You would notice it when you looked out, but your mind would move past it just as quickly. It became something invisible in a way. We also had motion detector lights set up outside. At first, those lights felt like a good thing. They gave a sense of security. If anything moved in the yard, the lights would come on. It made the place feel safer, like nothing could really happen without us being aware of it. It was a small detail, but one that made the house feel a little more protected, especially at night. But after a while, those lights started going off at random. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Lights like that get triggered easily. A small movement, something passing by, even the wind sometimes. But over time, it started happening more often. Sometimes it would be late at night when everything was quiet and still. Sometimes it would happen when no one was outside at all. The yard would suddenly light up, bright enough to catch your attention, and then just as quickly go dark again. To me, it seemed simple. Animals. That was the easiest explanation. Cats, maybe raccoons. Something small moving through the yard and triggering the sensor. It made sense. And because it made sense, I didn't question it. It was easy to accept and move on. But 2 of my housemates didn't see it that way. They were very into anything supernatural. Ghosts, spirits, anything like that. They believed in it fully, and they enjoyed talking about it. On top of that, they liked experimenting with different substances, so their way of interpreting things wasn't always grounded in reality. For them, the lights weren't just lights. They were signs. They became convinced that something was out there. Not an animal, not something normal, but something else. Something they couldn't fully see but felt was present. One of them even said she had seen it. She told us that one night she looked out and saw a man standing outside looking through the window. She described him as a figure, not completely clear, almost like something that didn't belong there. The way she spoke about it made it sound very real to her, like she truly believed what she had seen. But she had been high at the time, on mushrooms. So to me, it didn't mean much. It sounded like something her mind created in that state. I didn't take it seriously. It felt like one of those stories that grows when people already believe something is there. Still, they kept talking about it. The ghost became a regular topic in the house. Every time the lights went off, it reinforced their belief. Every strange sound, every small thing that didn't have an immediate explanation, it all fed into that idea. For them, it was something real. For me, it was nothing, just background noise. A few nights later, something happened that I didn't think much of at the time, but it stayed with me. I had been drinking that night, not completely out of it, but enough that things felt a little slower, a little less clear. I went toward the back of the house, near the mesh door that looked out into the yard, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone, a man, standing out there. It wasn't clear, it wasn't detailed, just a shape, a figure in the darkness, something that didn't belong. But I didn't react. I didn't question it. I told myself it wasn't real, that it was just my mind playing tricks on me. It made sense at the time. I had been drinking, and my housemates had been talking about this ghost constantly. It was easy to believe my brain had filled in the gaps, created something out of suggestion and imagination, so I ignored it. I didn't go outside. I didn't check. I just moved on like nothing had happened. At the time, it felt like the logical thing to do. Looking back, it feels different. Time passed, and eventually, I moved out of that house. I went back to my home country, and life moved forward. The house became just another place I used to live, something that faded into the background like most things do, until about 6 months later. I was on a FaceTime call with one of my old housemates. We were just talking normally at first, catching up, sharing small updates, nothing serious. Then the conversation shifted, and she mentioned something that immediately caught my attention. She told me it hadn't been a ghost. There had been a man living in our backyard, in the tool shed, a homeless man. No one knew exactly how long he had been there. It could have been weeks, maybe even months. There was no clear moment when he arrived. He had just been there quietly, without anyone noticing, living in that space the entire time. That's when everything started to connect. The lights, the movement, the feeling that something was out there. It had all been real, just not in the way anyone thought. There was no ghost. There was a person, someone living just a short distance away from us, moving around at night, staying hidden during the day, existing right there without us realizing it. And then that moment came back to me. The night I thought I saw someone through the mesh door, that shape, that figure. It hadn't been my imagination. That's the part that really stayed with me. Not just that he was there, but that I had seen him, even if only for a second, even if I didn't fully understand it at the time. I had looked right at him and convinced myself it wasn't real. That realization changes everything, because it means he had been close, closer than any of us realized. Moving around the yard using the tool shed, I triggering the lights, possibly watching the house without being seen. All of it happening while we lived our lives, completely unaware. It creates a strange feeling when you think about it. Not fear in the moment, because that moment is gone, but something else, a delayed awareness. The understanding that something had been happening right in front of you, and you didn't recognize it. It makes you think about how easy it is to miss things, how often we explain things in ways that fit what we already believe. My housemates thought it was something supernatural. I thought it was nothing at all. Neither of us saw the truth. And the truth was simple, but also unsettling in its own way. A real person, living there, right next to us. And we had no idea. After that, I started thinking about all the small details we ignored. The times the lights came on and no one checked. The sounds that didn't quite make sense but were brushed off. The way the tool shed just existed without ever being questioned. It wasn't hidden in some impossible way. It was just overlooked. And that's what makes it stay with me. Not because something directly happened to me, but because something was there the entire time. Close enough to see, close enough to notice, and I still convince myself it wasn't real. That's the part that lingers. Not just the situation itself, but the realization of how easily something real can exist right in front of you and still go unnoticed. And once you understand that, you don't look at things the same way again. It didn't happen to me directly, but to my wife's friend, and it's one of those stories that stays with you because of how easily it could have gone in a completely different direction. It's not just about what happened, but how close it came to becoming something much worse. It started like a normal evening. She had just finished work and was driving home. It was a quiet area with very little traffic, the kind of road where everything feels calm and predictable. The type of drive you don't think about because you've done it so many times before. Nothing about that moment stood out. Nothing felt unusual. It was just routine. The road stretched ahead of her, mostly empty, with only a few cars passing here and there. Streetlights gave off a steady glow, and everything looked exactly the way it always did. Familiar, simple, safe. Then she noticed a car behind her. At first, it didn't mean anything. Cars follow each other all the time, especially on roads like that. Someone driving faster than usual, someone catching up from behind, none of that is out of place. But this car didn't pass her. It stayed behind her. And then it started to get closer. That's when something shifted. The distance between them closed quickly, and before she could fully process it, the car behind her turned on flashing blue lights. That moment changes everything. Because when you see blue lights behind you, your reaction is automatic. You don't question it. You don't stop to think. You pull over. That's what everyone is taught. It's a habit built from years of hearing the same rule over and over. But in that moment, something didn't feel right to her. There was no clear reason for it. Nothing obvious that she could point to and say, this is wrong. The car was unmarked, but that can happen. Plain vehicles are sometimes used. There was no clear sign that it wasn't real. And still something felt off. That small feeling, that quiet hesitation, is what made the difference. Instead of immediately pulling over, she paused. That pause created space. Space to think. Space to question. Space to make a different decision. She decided to call her boyfriend. That decision alone says a lot. When something doesn't feel right, even in a small way, your mind looks for reassurance. You want someone else to confirm what you're feeling or help you understand it. She told him what was happening, that there was a car behind her with flashing lights trying to get her to stop, and that something about it didn't feel right. He didn't tell her to pull over. Instead, he gave her the number for the local police station. That became the next important step. She called while still driving. That couldn't have been easy, trying to stay calm, trying to explain clearly, while a car is behind you with flashing lights, not knowing what's really happening. She asked them a simple question. Is there an unmarked police car in this area trying to pull me over? The person on the other end checked. Maybe it was quick. Maybe it felt longer than it actually was, but the answer came back in time. And what they told her was simple. Keep driving. Stay calm. That response changed everything, because it meant one thing. The car behind her was not police. At that moment, what had looked like a normal situation became something dangerous. Everything about it shifted. The lights, the car, the pressure to pull over, it all became something else. She kept driving, trying to stay steady, trying not to panic, even though the situation had just become very real. There's a kind of tension in moments like that. Your body reacts, your mind starts racing, but you still have to stay in control. Then, within minutes, everything escalated. Multiple police cars appeared, not just one, but several. They came in fast, lights flashing, moving with purpose. Before she could fully understand what was happening, they surrounded the car behind her. They blocked it from all sides and forced it to stop. It must have felt unreal. One moment she was being followed by what looked like police. The next, real police were taking action against that same car. The dispatcher told her to keep driving and stop a little further ahead, away from the situation, safe. And that's when it became clear what had actually been happening. The man in that car wasn't a police officer. He had been pretending to be one, using those lights, that authority, to get people to pull over. And once they did, he would use a weapon to control them. That realization hits in a different way, because it means everything about that situation was designed to feel normal. Police lights, a car behind you, the expectation that you pull over without question. He used that. Turned something people trust into something dangerous. And that's what makes it so unsettling. Because if she had followed her first instinct, if she had done what most people do without thinking, things could have gone very differently. There wouldn't have been time to call anyone. No chance to question it. No moment to confirm whether it was real or not. That small hesitation changed everything. It gave her time to think, time to act differently, time to stay in control of the situation. Looking back, that's the part that matters the most. Not just what happened, but how close it was to something worse. How normal everything seemed at the beginning. How easily it could have stayed that way if she hadn't paused. And how something as small as listening to that quiet feeling, that sense that something wasn't right, made all the difference. It's the kind of story that stays with you, because it reminds you that danger doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it looks exactly like something you've been taught to trust. And in those moments, the only thing you have is that small instinct telling you to stop and think. And sometimes, that's enough to save you. After that, the way she drove at night changed a little. Not in a way that made her afraid of everything, but in a way that made her more aware. She paid more attention to her surroundings, to the behavior of other drivers, to small details she might have ignored before. It wasn't fear. It was understanding. The understanding that situations don't always mean what they appear to mean. That something can look completely normal and still be wrong. That a simple moment can shift into something serious without warning. That awareness stayed with her. Not as something overwhelming, but as something quiet in the background. A reminder. Because once you experience something like that, even indirectly, you don't forget it. You carry it with you. Not just the memory of what happened, but the understanding of how quickly things can change. And how sometimes the difference between being safe and being in danger comes down to one small decision. One moment of hesitation. One choice to trust yourself instead of the situation in front of you. And sometimes, that's all it takes. We were a group of 5 or 6 friends driving in 2 cars. one following the other, heading along Interstate 84. We were about 8 miles east of the Dalles, on our way to an AC/DC concert in Portland. It was supposed to be a fun night, the kind of trip where everyone is excited, talking over each other, laughing, thinking about the music and the crowd and everything waiting ahead. Most of that stretch of road runs along the Columbia River, which separates Oregon from Washington. During the day, it's a beautiful drive, something you actually notice and enjoy. But at night, it feels completely different. The water disappears into darkness. The land around you fades away, and all that really exists is the road in front of you. There's one section in particular that stands out. The westbound highway narrows into 2 lanes and stretches out over the water. It almost feels like you're driving on a thin strip cutting through it. On one side is the river, and on the other side is a smaller body of water, like a quiet extension shaped by the land. Guardrails run along both sides, but even with them there, you can't ignore how exposed it feels. There's a constant awareness that there isn't much space for mistakes. By the time we reached that part, it was fully dark. Not the kind of darkness where you can still make things out, but the kind where your headlights are doing all the work. The road ahead is visible, but everything beyond that fades into black. The world shrinks down to what's directly in front of you. I was driving in the left lane, going about 65 miles per hour. Everything felt normal. The car was steady, the road was clear, and there was nothing to suggest anything out of the ordinary. And then, in a single moment, everything changed. Out of nowhere, there was someone standing in the middle of my lane. At first, it didn't make sense. Your brain doesn't accept something like that right away. It expects the road to be empty, especially in a place like that, especially at that speed. So when something appears where it shouldn't be, there's a split second where your mind struggles to understand what you're seeing. But he was there, a man, standing directly in front of the car. He looked wrong in a way that's hard to explain. He was wearing a long trench coat that hung loosely off him, moving slightly in the wind of the passing air, and his face looked bright red, not just flushed, not just a normal color under headlights, but something deeper, something that immediately made my mind think of blood. There wasn't time to question it. And he wasn't just standing still. He raised his arms and started moving toward the car. That's the part that didn't feel real. It wasn't like someone caught off guard trying to get out of the way. It felt intentional, like he was stepping into the path, closing the distance instead of backing away. Everything after that happened on instinct. There was no time to slow down properly, no time to process, no time to think about what the right move was. I swerved, just enough to avoid hitting him. The car shifted hard, the kind of movement that could have gone wrong if I had overcorrected even slightly. But somehow I kept control. It felt like a near miss in the purest sense. The kind where you know how close it was, even if you don't have time to measure it. And then immediately, another thought hit. Our friends. They were behind us, about 8 car lengths back. There was no way they hadn't seen him. No way they would have time to react normally. I checked the mirror, and in that moment, everything felt stretched. Their car swerved hard. Much harder than I had. For a second, it looked like they were going to lose control completely. The kind of movement where you expect the car to spin or hit the guardrail. The headlights shifted sharply, the car cutting across its lane in a way that didn't look stable. But somehow they corrected it. The car stayed on the road. They didn't hit him either. That's what made it feel impossible. 2 cars, both moving at speed, both reacting within seconds. And neither of us hit him. And then, just like that, it was over. We kept driving for a short distance. Not because we had decided to, but because stopping immediately didn't even feel like an option. Everything was still catching up. Your body keeps moving forward even when your mind hasn't fully processed what just happened. No one said much at first. There's a kind of silence that comes after something like that. Not because there's nothing to say, but because there's too much happening at once inside your head. Eventually, we pulled off and stopped in the dolls. When we got out, you could feel it in everyone. That same tension, that same confusion. Everyone had seen it. Everyone described the same thing. The man, the coat, the face, the way he moved. It wasn't unclear or vague. It wasn't one person misinterpreting something. Jim, it was the same image, the same moment shared across all of us. We reported it, told them what we saw, where it happened, how there had been a man standing in the road. It felt like the right thing to do. If someone was out there, if something had happened, someone needed to know. But nothing came from it. No reports of an accident. No mention of anyone found on the road. No signs of damage to the guardrails. Nothing. It was like it hadn't happened at all. That's what makes it stay with you. Not just what we saw, but what didn't follow. There was no explanation, no confirmation, no piece of information that could connect it to something clear and real in a way that made sense. Just that moment, that image, that sudden appearance in the headlights. Even now, it's hard to understand what it was. Now, maybe it was a person in a situation we couldn't fully see. Maybe something had happened before we got there, something that made him look the way he did. Maybe the lighting, the speed, and the shock made everything feel more extreme than it really was. But in that moment, it didn't feel simple. It felt wrong, out of place in a way that your mind doesn't forget. And that's why it stays, not because something happened after, but because nothing did. Because sometimes the most unsettling part isn't what you can explain. It's what you can't. That empty space where answers should be, and the memory of something standing in the road, where nothing should have been at all. I was around 6 or 7 years old at the time. Looking back now, I can see how different things were for me compared to other kids my age. I didn't really have friends, and a lot of that came from my home life, which was messy in the ways I didn't understand back then. On top of that, I had ADHD, and my teeth were in bad shape before I later got braces and a palate expander. All of it made it harder to connect with other kids. I mostly kept to myself, not really knowing how to fit in or how to be part of things the way others seem to do so easily. That's why, when the older girl next door started paying attention to me, I didn't question it. Her name was Angela, and she was around 14 or 15. To me, she seemed like an adult, someone older. Choosing to spend time with me felt important. At that age, you don't think about whether something makes sense or not. You don't question motives. You just accept what's happening. I didn't have the awareness to see anything strange about it. I just felt like someone wanted to hang out with me, and that was enough. She would ask me to come over often, and I always said yes. It felt like something I had been missing. A connection, even if I didn't understand it fully. I didn't think about why she wanted to spend time with me. I didn't think about whether it was normal. I just went along with it because it felt good to be included. One day, she invited me inside again. I don't remember exactly what she said we were going to do. It was probably something simple, like playing or just hanging out. That's how it always started. Normal, casual, nothing that raised any kind of concern. But that day felt different almost immediately. She took me into her parents' bedroom. I remember that part clearly because it wasn't somewhere I expected to go. It felt like a place kids weren't supposed to be, but I didn't question it. I just followed her, the way I always had. And then I noticed what was in the room. There were weapons everywhere. Not just one or two things, but enough that, even as a kid, it stood out. I didn't fully understand what I was looking at, but I knew it wasn't normal. I remember her saying that her dad was in the military, something like an Army Ranger or Special Forces. At the time, that didn't mean much to me, but it explained why there were so many things like that in the house. She picked up a shotgun. At first, she joked about it, saying things about killing me or other people, but in a way that didn't sound serious to me back then. I was a kid. I didn't understand what those words really meant. I laughed, thinking it was just part of playing around. But then she loaded it. I remember watching her do it, the sound of it, the way she handled it, the way the atmosphere in the room changed. Something shifted, even if I couldn't fully understand it. What had felt like a joke suddenly didn't feel like one anymore. And then she pointed it at me, right at my face. That's when everything changed. She told me to crawl. At first, I didn't fully understand what she meant, but she repeated it, more seriously this time. And because of the way she was holding the gun, because of the way she was looking at me, I listened. I got on the ground and started crawling. What felt like minutes stretched into something much longer. Time didn't move normally. It felt slow and heavy. I crawled around the house crying, scared in a way I didn't know how to explain. She followed me, sometimes laughing, sometimes quiet, always holding the gun. Sometimes she brought it close to my face. Sometimes she pushed it against me. Sometimes she switched to other weapons, pointing them at me, pretending to use them, making sounds, creating fear again and again. I didn't know what to do. At that age, you don't think about escaping in a clear way. You don't plan. You just react. You try to get through whatever is happening without fully understanding it. At some point, she told me to take off my clothes. That's when something inside me resisted. Even if I didn't fully understand why, I knew I didn't want to do that. Something about it felt wrong in a way that I couldn't explain. I told her I would do it in the bathroom. I don't know how I came up with that. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the only way I could think of to create distance between us. She let me go. I crawled to the bathroom, closed the door, and locked it as quickly as I could. That was the first moment I felt even a small sense of control. But I also knew I couldn't stay there. I remember looking around, trying to figure out what to do. My heart was racing, my thoughts scattered. Nothing felt clear, but I knew I had to get out. Then I saw the window. It wasn't low. It was about a story and a half up. But at that moment, staying inside felt worse than anything else. So I climbed out, and I jumped. I landed hard. The impact knocked the air out of me for a second. I hit face first, and I remember the pain, the shock, the way everything blurred together. I chipped my tooth, and for a moment I couldn't fully process what had happened. But I was outside. I was away from her. And that was enough. I got up and ran. I didn't tell anyone right away. For about 2 weeks, I kept it to myself. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't understand what had happened. I didn't have the words for it. I didn't know how to explain it, or even that I needed to. Eventually, I told my mom, and everything changed again. She reacted immediately. There was no hesitation, no confusion. She understood how serious it was right away. She called the police, and they went to the house to question Angela and her parents. When they asked her why she did it, her answer didn't make sense. She said it was because I had shot her with a Nerf gun once. That was her explanation. Even now, that doesn't feel real. After that, I didn't see her again for a long time. Years later, I found out she had been admitted to a mental hospital by her parents. I don't know what happened after that, and I never tried to find out. But I think about that day sometimes. Not all the time, but in the way certain memories stay with you quietly, the kind that never fully disappears. I think about how easily things could have gone differently, how I didn't understand the danger at first, how close it all was, and how one small decision changed everything. Asking to go to the bathroom, locking the door, choosing to jump. At that age, I didn't understand what I was doing. I just knew I needed to get away. And somehow I did. Looking back now, it still feels unreal that I made it out of that situation. Yeah, that something so serious happened in what started as something so normal. But I'm here, and that's what matters. And even though I didn't understand it then, I can see it now. That moment didn't just show how dangerous things can become without warning. It also showed something else. That even when you don't fully understand what's happening, there's still something inside you that tries to protect you. Something that pushes you to act, to find a way out. And sometimes, that's enough. When I was at university, my friend and I decided to go out one night because a club nearby was offering free shots. It wasn't anything special, just a normal plan, something students do all the time. We were in a good mood, talking and laughing as we walked there, already thinking about the music and the crowd and how the night might go. Everything felt simple. We knew where we were going. We had a plan. It was just another night out. On the way there, though, something changed. We were stopped by two girls and a man. The girls did all the talking. They were friendly, confident, the kind of people who seem easy to trust at first. The man stayed slightly behind them, not really engaging. He didn't say anything. He just watched. That alone felt a little strange, but not enough to set off any clear alarm at the time. The girls started talking to us, asking where we were going, and when we told them, they immediately tried to convince us to go somewhere else instead. They were very insistent. Not aggressive, but persistent in a way that made it hard to just brush them off. We kept saying we already had plans, but they kept pushing. They told us the man with them had a lot of money, that he would pay for everything, entry, drinks, whatever we wanted. They made it sound like an easy upgrade to our night, something better than what we had planned. At first, we resisted. We didn't know them. We didn't have any reason to trust them. But at the same time, nothing they were saying sounded openly dangerous. It just felt like a different option, one that kept getting presented to us over and over. Eventually, we gave in. That's how it usually happens. Not because you fully trust the situation, but because nothing seems wrong enough to walk away. We followed them to the other club. At the door, the man paid. That part stood out immediately. When he pulled out his wallet, it was full of cash. Not just a little, but enough that it caught your attention. It made what the girls had said feel real. He really did have money, and he really was willing to spend it. At that point, it still felt like maybe we had just stumbled into something unexpected, but harmless. But as soon as we got inside, everything shifted. We didn't even get a chance to talk to each other. Almost immediately, the girls separated us. They took my friend straight to the dance floor, pulling her away before we could even react. At the same time, they told me to go to the bar with the man. He grabbed my hand and led me over. That's when the uneasiness really started to settle in. Up until that point, I could explain everything away. But being split up like that so quickly and so deliberately didn't feel right. At the bar, he still hadn't spoken. Not really. He asked what I wanted to drink, and that was it. No conversation, no normal interaction. Just silence. I said a single vodka and soda. He ordered doubles. That detail stuck with me. And then something else stood out. He didn't order a drink for himself. He didn't order drinks for the two girls either, just for me. That made the feeling worse. It didn't feel like a normal situation anymore. I was standing there holding two drinks, and suddenly everything felt off. The noise of the club, the music, the people around me, it all faded into the background a little as my focus shifted to what was happening. I told him I wanted to find my friend. That's when he changed. Suddenly, he became very talkative, very close, very physical. He started telling me to stay with him, that he had a lot of money, that he would treat me like a princess all night. His tone changed completely, like he was trying to pull me back in now that I was trying to leave. It didn't feel genuine. It felt controlled. I was still holding the drinks, feeling more and more uncomfortable, trying to think of a way out without making things worse. I managed to get away. Even now, I'm not exactly sure how. Maybe I said I needed the bathroom. Maybe I just moved at the right moment when he wasn't expecting it. It's one of those things where you act on instinct and don't fully remember the steps afterward. What I do remember is getting onto the dance floor. And the first thing I did was pour both drinks out into a corner. That decision came without thinking. I didn't want to drink them. I didn't trust them. After that, I started searching for my friend, quickly at first, then more urgently. The crowd made it hard. People moving, lights flashing, everything blending together. It was difficult to see clearly, difficult to focus, but I kept moving through the space trying to find her. I couldn't see her anywhere. That's when the concern turned into something stronger. I went outside to the smoking area. She didn't smoke, but I thought maybe she would go there if she was looking for me. It felt like a place where I might have a better chance of finding her. Outside, I saw a few guys I knew. I asked them if they had seen her and explained what had happened. I tried to keep it light at first. He even joked that it felt like we were about to get sold into something serious. But even as I said it, it didn't feel like a joke. They laughed at first, but then they stopped. They said it actually sounded serious, that it didn't feel right, that we should find her as soon as possible. That confirmation made everything feel heavier. Before we could even continue the conversation, the door to the smoking area suddenly burst open. It slammed against the wall with force, and my friend came rushing out. She was shouting, angry, scared, overwhelmed all at once. She said I had left her, that the girls had been trying to convince her to go with them to a house outside the city, somewhere near a red light district, that they kept pushing her, telling her to come with them, not taking no for an answer. And she was certain, completely certain, that if she had gone with them, something bad would have happened. She had managed to get away, but just barely. Hearing that confirmed everything I'd been feeling. We hadn't talked to each other at all during that time. We hadn't shared any concerns or suspicions. And yet, we both came to the same conclusion separately. Something wasn't right. Something about that situation was planned. The way we were approached, the way we were convinced, the way we were separated immediately, the way the man behaved, the drinks, the pressure, all of it. It fit together in a way that didn't feel random. We left soon after. There wasn't even a discussion about staying. The night was over at that point. The mood had changed completely, and all that mattered was getting out of there safely. Looking back, it's easy to say we were lucky. Because if things had gone slightly differently, if we hadn't trusted those small feelings, if we hadn't managed to get away when we did, there's no way to know how it would have ended. We joke about it now sometimes. That's how people deal with things like that. But underneath that, there's always that awareness that it wasn't just a strange night. It was something closer to danger than we realized at the time. And the fact that we both felt it, separately, without even speaking, makes it feel even more real. Because sometimes you don't need proof in the moment. Sometimes that quiet instinct is enough. And sometimes listening to it is the only reason you get to walk away. I grew up in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where you don't really understand the danger when you're a kid because it just feels normal. To me, it was just home. It was where I played, where I spent most of my time outside, usually in the woods or around the abandoned house next door. That place didn't feel scary back then. It felt like something to explore, like an adventure waiting to happen. I think I was around 8 or 9 years old when this happened. It was nighttime, but not too late. Just dark enough that everything felt a little different from the day. The kind of darkness where you can still see shapes, but not clearly. The air feels quieter, sounds carry a little further, and everything around you seems slightly unfamiliar, even if you've been there 100 times before. I was outside in the yard of that abandoned house, doing what kids do when they're bored and full of energy. I was playing in the bushes, climbing on low branches, jumping around like they were part of some imaginary world. In my head, I was probably acting out something, maybe a wrestling match or some kind of made-up game. I was making noise, moving through the leaves, completely focused on whatever story I had created for myself. To me, it was just play. But to someone else, it must have sounded very different. There were people inside that abandoned house. I didn't know they were there. I had no reason to think anyone would be. That place had always felt empty. It was just part of the background, something that existed but didn't matter. But that night, it wasn't empty. They heard the noise, branches moving, leaves shaking, my footsteps in the dark. And instead of thinking it was just a kid messing around, they thought it was something else. Maybe they felt threatened. Maybe they thought someone was coming after them. Whatever was going through their minds, it led them to react in the worst possible way. They pulled out guns, and without really seeing what was out there, they fired. The first shot shattered the front window. The sound cut through everything. It wasn't just loud, it was sharp, sudden, the kind of noise that makes your body react before your mind understands it. Glass exploded outward, scattering across the ground. The shots were in my direction. They couldn't see me clearly, but they were shooting anyway. At that age, you don't have a plan for something like that. You don't think about what the right move is. You just react. I ran. I didn't look back at first. I just moved as fast as I could, away from the sound, away from the house. My heart was racing, my body moving on instinct, not thinking, just trying to get away. But they saw me. Once I moved, once I became visible, they fired again. The shots followed me. Their aim wasn't good, but that didn't matter. The fact that they were shooting at all was enough. I could hear the sound behind me, sharp cracks breaking through the night. I kept running. My house was right next door, close enough that I could reach it quickly, but in that moment, it felt much farther away. Every second stretched out. Every step felt heavier, like I wasn't moving fast enough. I reached the side door and ran inside. I didn't stop. I didn't lock it. I didn't even think about closing it properly. I just needed to get somewhere that felt safe. Looking back, it seems obvious what I should have done, but at that age, you don't think like that. You just react and hope it's enough. My mom had already heard the shots. When I came inside, everything felt chaotic. She was yelling, asking what was happening, saying someone was shooting. The house felt loud and tense, like everything had changed in seconds. I told her I thought they were shooting at me. That changed everything. She didn't hesitate. She went straight into defense mode. She opened the front door and shouted out, demanding to know who was shooting at her kid. There was anger in her voice, not fear. The kind of reaction that comes from instinct, from wanting to protect without thinking about the risk. And then they fired again, this time in her direction. Not to hit her, but to scare her. The shots hit the house. You could hear them hitting the wood, the structure, places that were supposed to be safe. The walls, the panels, parts of the house that suddenly didn't feel solid anymore. And then they ran, just like that. They were gone. The silence that followed didn't feel normal. It wasn't calm. It felt heavy, like something had happened that hadn't settled yet, like the air itself was holding on to it. We stayed in that house for years after that, 6 or 7 more years. And as far as I remember, those bullets stayed where they hit, embedded in the wood, part of the house now, like a permanent reminder of that night. At the time, I didn't fully understand how serious it was. As a kid, you process things differently. You feel the fear in the moment, but you don't always understand how close things were, how easily it could have gone another way. Looking back now, it feels different. It feels real in a way it didn't back then, because it wasn't just a random moment. It was a situation where everything could have changed in seconds. I was just a kid playing in the yard. They were just people inside a house. And somehow, those two things collided in the worst possible way. That's what makes it stay. Not just the memory of running or the sound of the shots, but the realization of how little it takes for something normal to turn into something dangerous, how quickly things can shift, and how close you can come to something much worse without even realizing it at the time. After that night, things didn't feel exactly the same, even if I didn't fully understand why back then. The yard still looked the same, the abandoned house was still there, and life continued the way it always had. But something small had changed in the background. There was a new awareness, not something I could explain at that age, but something I could feel. A sense that things weren't always as simple as they seemed, that the places you thought were empty might not be, that the sounds you made might be heard in ways you didn't expect. I still went outside. I still played. But there was always something in the back of my mind after that. Something quiet. Something that didn't go away completely. And as I got older, that memory changed. It stopped being just a story about something that happened. It became something else, a realization that sometimes danger doesn't come from something you're doing wrong. Sometimes it comes from being in the wrong place at the wrong time. From people reacting without understanding. From situations that don't give you a chance to explain. And that's what makes it stay with you. Not just what happened, but how easily it could have ended differently. Because when you look back at it now, you can see all the ways it could have gone wrong, all the ways it could have been worse. And the fact that it wasn't doesn't make it less serious. It just makes it something you carry with you in a different way. A moment where everything could have changed, but didn't. And that's enough to make it stay. A few years ago, I was living in a big city where I didn't really know anyone. Everything felt temporary back then, like I was just passing through a version of my life that hadn't fully settled yet. The streets were familiar enough that I could find my way around, but not familiar enough to feel comfortable. Every day felt like I was adjusting, learning small things, watching people, trying to understand how everything worked. There was always that slight distance between me and the place I was living in. I had started seeing someone around that time, and he came from abroad to visit me. It was one of those situations that feels exciting in the beginning. Having someone familiar in a place that feels unfamiliar changes everything. It softens things. It makes the city feel less heavy, less distant. Even if it's only temporary, it creates a sense of comfort you didn't realize you were missing. But eventually, his trip came to an end. I went with him to the train station to say goodbye. It was a normal goodbye, nothing dramatic, just that quiet moment where you both know things are about to shift back to how they were before. When his train left, I stood there for a while, letting that feeling settle in. And then I turned and made my way toward the metro. It was around 2 p.m. Outside, everything felt normal. Bright daylight, people moving around, the kind of atmosphere that usually makes you feel safe without thinking about it. There was no reason to feel worried. Nothing suggested that anything unusual was about to happen. I went down into the station and sat on a bench to wait. There was a man already sitting nearby. We made eye contact, and I said hello. He said hello back. It was quick, polite, nothing more. The kind of interaction you don't even remember later. But even in that brief moment, something didn't feel right. I couldn't explain it. There was nothing obvious, just a feeling. Still, I ignored it. It was easier to assume I was overthinking. It was daytime. There were people around. Nothing had actually happened. There was no reason to make it into something bigger than it was. The train arrived and we both got on. It was crowded. People standing, sitting, adjusting as the train moved. I found a seat, and he ended up sitting directly across from me, one of the only empty spots. At that point, I tried to convince myself I had imagined that uneasy feeling. He started talking to another man nearby, and it seemed like they knew each other. That made everything feel normal again. Like I had misread the situation. For a few stops, nothing happened. The man he was talking to got off, but he stayed. And that's when the feeling came back. Stronger. I tried to ignore it again, but something about it didn't sit right anymore. It was like my mind was trying to push it away, but my body wasn't letting me. When my stop came, the one where I needed to get off and change lines, I stood up. He stood up too. He moved in behind me, close enough that I could see him in the reflection of the metro window. I wasn't looking directly at him, but I didn't need to. The reflection was enough. He was looking at me, slowly, up and down. Not quick, not casual, careful. That's when the feeling shifted. It wasn't just uneasiness anymore. It was something heavier. The doors opened, and we both got off. I started walking quickly toward the end of the platform, trying to create distance. At first, I wasn't sure if I was imagining it again. But then I noticed something. He was following me. There were multiple exits and pathways, so I made a quick decision. I changed direction suddenly, heading toward a different exit. He changed direction too. I turned again. He followed. I did it again. And again. Each time hoping I was wrong. Each time confirming that I wasn't. He was matching every move. That's when it became real. This wasn't in my head. At that point, I knew I couldn't just keep doing that. I couldn't keep turning and hoping it would stop. I needed to get somewhere safer. I headed toward the passageway that would take me to the next line so I could go home. But it was crowded. Too crowded. People filled the space, moving slowly, blocking the way. It wasn't the kind of crowd where you can disappear. It was the kind that traps you, slows you down, makes everything harder. And that's when he caught up. He moved closer, then closer, until there was nowhere left for me to go. I ended up backed against a wall, with him standing right in front of me. He wasn't touching me, but he was too close. Close enough that I couldn't move forward, couldn't step around him, couldn't create space. He was smiling, brightly, like nothing was wrong. "Hello, how are you?" he said, stepping closer. In that moment, I was scared. Not just uncomfortable, not just uneasy, actually scared. And what made it worse was everything around us. People walking past, no one stopping, no one stepping in. Or maybe they noticed and chose not to get involved. Either way, it felt like I was completely on my own. That realization changes everything. Because once you understand that no one is going to step in, you know it's up to you. I looked around quickly, trying to find anything that could get me out. To my right, I saw a staircase going down. And without thinking, I ran. I didn't say anything. I didn't hesitate. I just moved. Fast. It caught him off guard. For a second, maybe two, he didn't react. That small delay was enough. I ran down the stairs as fast as I could, not even thinking about where they led. At the bottom, there was a train. I got on immediately. Then I turned around. He was coming down the stairs, running. He had realized what was happening and was trying to catch up. For a moment, it felt like he might make it. But the doors closed just before he reached the bottom. The train started moving, and he was left behind. I stood there trying to catch my breath. My heart was still racing. Everything felt unreal, like it had happened too fast to fully process. By chance, I had gotten onto the right train, going in the direction I needed. But at that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was that I had gotten away. Even after it was over, the feeling didn't leave. That awareness stayed. That understanding that something can change quickly, without warning, even in the middle of the day, even in a crowded place. It wasn't the only time something like that happened, but it was one of the moments that changed how I moved through the world afterward. Now, when I walk alone, especially in places like that, I notice more. I pay attention. Not because I want to, but because I remember what that felt like. That moment when something small becomes something real, and how quickly it happens, and how sometimes the only thing that gets you out of it is reacting before it's too late. That's what stayed with me. Not just what happened, but how close it came to going another way, and how everything came down to one decision: to run. After that, I started noticing details I would have ignored before. The way someone walks behind you, how long they stay in your space, how they react when you change direction. Small things that don't seem important on their own, but together they create a pattern. I didn't become afraid of everything, but I became aware. There's a difference between the two. Fear takes over. Awareness stays quiet but present. It sits in the background, guiding small decisions, helping you notice when something doesn't fit. That day taught me that those small signals matter. That feeling you can't explain, that hesitation you try to ignore. Sometimes that's the only warning you get. And sometimes listening to it is what keeps you safe. Because not every situation gives you time to think. Not every moment gives you a clear answer. Sometimes you only have instinct. And sometimes that's enough. That's why it stayed with me. Not just because of what happened, but because of how quickly everything changed, and how close it came to something worse, and how, in the end, it all came down to one moment, one decision, one action: to move, to run, and not look back. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. It's one of those stories that doesn't leave you once you hear it. Not because of the way it's told, but because of what it represents when you really sit with it. It doesn't hit all at once. It settles slowly, and the more you think about it, the heavier it becomes. At first, it feels distant, like something that belongs to another world. But the longer you carry it, the closer it feels. I didn't hear it directly from the people involved. It came from someone who had lived close to that kind of life. Someone who had seen things most people never come near. My friend's mom told it. She had been part of a rough environment in the past, connected to people and situations where things could turn dark without warning. When she spoke, it never felt exaggerated. If anything, it felt like she was leaving things out. I like what she said was only a small part of something much bigger. She told me about a man she knew. At first, there was nothing about him that stood out. That's what makes it harder to understand. People expect danger to look a certain way, to give some kind of sign, some kind of warning. But most of the time, it doesn't. Most of the time, it looks normal. It blends in so well that you don't even think to question it. He had a family, a wife, children. From the outside, it probably looked like any other home, the kind of place where life moves in a routine. Mornings, meals, small conversations. Ordinary moments that don't seem important at the time. The kind of environment people assume is safe, because it's supposed to be. But underneath that, there was something else. It wasn't always visible. It didn't show itself clearly every day. But it was there, building quietly. A mix of anger, alcohol, drugs, and things that had been growing over time. The kind of tension that sits in the background, unnoticed until something pushes it too far. And one night, something did. It started as an argument. That part is easy to picture. Voices getting louder, words turning sharper, the space between two people becoming tense in a way that feels unstable. It's hard to say exactly where the line is, the moment where it stops being just an argument and becomes something else. But that line was crossed. What followed wasn't controlled. It wasn't slow. It wasn't something anyone could step back from once it began. It became chaotic, unpredictable, the kind of situation where everything happens faster than anyone can process. She tried to get away. That part feels instinctive. When something turns like that, the first reaction is to create distance, to move away, to find safety wherever possible. But situations like that don't always give you time. Everything was happening too quickly. The space they were in, the way things escalated, it all worked against her. And then something around them broke. Not just between them, but part of the environment itself. The space they were in became part of what was happening, making everything more dangerous in a way that couldn't be controlled. From that point on, there was no stopping it. He didn't fully understand what was happening. Or maybe he did, but not in a way that made him stop. When someone is that far gone, caught up in that kind of anger and under the influence, reality doesn't register the way it should. Things continue even when they should have ended. What makes this story heavier isn't just what happened between them. It's who else was there. Their children. They were in the same room, close enough to see, too young to understand everything, but old enough to feel it. To feel the fear, the confusion, the shift in the air when something goes wrong in a way that can't be undone, and they couldn't do anything. That's the part that stays. Not just the event itself, but the fact that it happened in front of them. That something like that became part of their understanding of the world at such a young age. Moments like that don't disappear when they end. They stay. They shape how you see things afterward. What safety means, what trust means, what a home is supposed to feel like. When it was over, there was no fixing it. No way to undo what had already happened. No way to go back. She didn't survive. And in the silence that followed, there was nothing left but the reality of it. The man didn't face it in a way that made sense either. From what I was told, when everything caught up to him, he didn't fully accept what had happened. Whether it was denial, confusion, or something else, he couldn't process it in a normal way. And not long after, he ended his own life. That part doesn't bring closure. It doesn't make anything right. It doesn't balance what happened. It just adds another layer to something that was already broken. But even with all of that, the part that stayed with me wasn't him. It wasn't even the details of that night. It was the children. Because they didn't choose any of it. They didn't understand it. They just experienced it. And that's what makes it heavier the more you think about it. Because when something like that happens, it doesn't end when the moment ends. It continues in memories, in reactions, in the way the world feels afterward. When I think about that story, that's where my mind always goes, to that moment, to them sitting there, and realizing that in situations like that, there's nothing they could have done. No way to stop it. No way to escape it in that moment. Just watching something happen that no one should ever have to see. That's what makes it stay. Not just because it's violent, but because it's real. Because it happens in places that are supposed to be safe. Because it shows how quickly something normal can turn into something irreversible. And how sometimes the worst part of a story isn't just what happened. It's who has to live with it afterward. That's what gives it weight. That's what makes it linger. And that's why it doesn't go away. Because once you understand what something like that really means, you don't hear it the same way again. It stops being just a story and becomes something else entirely. It becomes something that changes how you look at the world, something that makes you realize how fragile normal life can be, how quickly it can break, and how sometimes the most unsettling part isn't the moment itself. It's everything that comes after, because the moment ends, but the memory doesn't. And for the people who live through it, it never really does. Even years later, those kinds of experiences don't disappear. They don't fade the way ordinary memories do. Instead, they sit quietly in the background, shaping reactions, shaping thoughts, shaping the way someone moves through the world. It changes how silence feels. It changes how raised voices feel. It changes how quickly your mind reacts when something seems even slightly wrong. And often, those changes aren't obvious to anyone else. From the outside, everything might look normal, but inside, there's a different understanding of how fragile things can be, a different awareness of how quickly something can shift. That's the part people don't always see, the part that comes after. Because stories like this don't really end. They just stop at a certain point. But for the people who live through it, they continue in ways that aren't always visible. In small moments, in reactions, in memories that come back without warning. And that's why it stays with anyone who hears it too. Because it reminds you that normal life isn't as solid as it feels. And that the line between calm and chaos is thinner than people think. And that sometimes all it takes is one moment for everything to change. Not slowly, not gradually, but all at once. And once it happens, nothing is ever exactly the same again. I still think about that time more often than I would like. It doesn't come back all at once. It comes in small pieces, like flashes that don't fully make sense until they start to connect. At first, it feels like a memory from far away, like something that happened in another life. But the more I sit with it, the more real it becomes, and the harder it is to push away. My uncle had been living in another country for as long as I could remember. He wasn't someone I saw often, but when I did, it always felt special. He wasn't just my uncle. He was also my godfather, and that meant something to me even at that young age. I looked up to him in a way that's hard to explain. He had this presence, this warmth, and whenever he visited, it felt like the whole house changed. People laughed more, stayed up later, and everything felt lighter. He would come back home every few years, sometimes after 3 years, sometimes longer. So when we found out he was coming for Christmas that year, I was beyond excited. I remember counting the days, asking questions about when he would arrive, what he would bring, and how long he would stay. To a child, time feels different, and waiting felt endless. But when he finally arrived, it was like everything I had imagined, maybe even better. That year, our family decided to have a big gathering for New Year's Eve. It wasn't just a small dinner. It was something much bigger. There were more than 30 people in the house, maybe even more. Cousins, uncles, aunts, family friends, people talking over each other, music playing in the background, food everywhere. It was loud, messy, and full of life. I remember running around with other kids, not really understanding everything the adults were talking about, but feeling safe and happy just being there. My uncle was at the center of it all. People kept coming up to him, hugging him, laughing with him, asking about his life abroad. He looked happy too. I remember thinking that he seemed relaxed, like he had left all his worries somewhere else and was just enjoying being home. Every time I passed by him, he would smile or say something small to me, and that stayed with me. As the night went on, the energy in the house kept building. People were waiting for midnight, counting down the last minutes of the year. When the clock finally hit 12, everyone shouted, hugged each other, and wished for a better year ahead. I didn't know then how different that year would actually be. After midnight, things slowly started to calm down. Some people sat down to talk, others kept eating or drinking, and a few were getting ready to leave. It was around 1 in the morning when my uncle's friends arrived to pick him up. They had plans to go out to a disco that was far from the city. I remember hearing them talk about it. It sounded exciting, like something fun and full of music and lights, even though I'd never been to a place like that. The adults didn't seem worried. It was normal for them. They were young. They wanted to celebrate. And the night still felt alive. Before leaving, my uncle said goodbye to a few people. I don't remember exactly what he said to me, but I remember him smiling. That smile stayed in my mind for a long time after everything else changed. They got into the car and left. At that time, it didn't feel like anything important. It was just another moment in a long night. No one thought it would be the last time we would see him like that. The road they were taking wasn't well lit. It was far from the city, and at night, it became almost completely dark. There were no streetlights, no buildings nearby, just long stretches of empty road. It was the kind of darkness where you can barely see anything beyond what your headlights show. Somewhere on that road, everything went wrong. A truck, or what we were later told was a truck, came from the opposite direction. It had no lights on. It was moving fast, too fast. There was no time to react, no chance to avoid it. It collided directly with the car my uncle was in. The impact was so strong that the people sitting in the front seats died instantly. They didn't even have time to understand what was happening. One of the passengers in the back was taken to the hospital, but didn't survive the same day. My uncle was the only one who lived through it. When we first heard about the accident, everything became confusion and panic. I was too young to fully understand what was happening, but I could feel that something was very wrong. Adults were talking in hushed voices. Some were crying, others were trying to make phone calls. The house that had been full of laughter just hours before suddenly felt heavy and silent. My uncle was taken to the hospital, and what happened to him there is something I only understood later, piece by piece. He survived, but the damage was severe. His body was broken in many places. He had metal bars placed in his arms and legs to hold everything together. His skin was covered in scars. His face had changed so much that people who knew him struggled to recognize him. But the physical injuries were only part of it. When he woke up, he couldn't remember who he was. He didn't recognize his own family. He didn't recognize his own name. It was like his past had been erased. And in that empty space, his mind created something else. He became convinced that he had been the one driving the car. He believed that he had caused the accident, that the deaths of the others were his fault. No matter how many times people told him otherwise, he couldn't accept it. To him, it felt real. It felt true. That guilt stayed with him, growing stronger over time. His recovery was slow, painfully slow. It took him about a year just to start moving again. Even simple actions were difficult. Walking, sitting, even holding things required effort. He had to learn everything again, step by step. But the hardest part wasn't the physical healing. It was what was happening inside his mind. He was not the same person who had come home for the holidays. The warmth, the lightness, the easy smile, all of that was gone. In its place, there was confusion, sadness, and a kind of quiet that didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy. I was living with my grandmother at the time, and he was staying there too during his recovery. I saw him often, but I didn't fully understand what he was going through. I was just a child, trying to make sense of something that didn't make sense. There were moments when he seemed present, like he was trying to connect with the world again. But those moments didn't last. Most of the time, he seemed lost in his own thoughts. Months passed after he started moving again. From the outside, it might have looked like things were getting better, but something inside him wasn't healing. Then, one morning, everything changed again. I remember waking up like it was any other day. I was told to bring him breakfast. It felt like a normal task, something simple. I didn't think twice about it. I walked to his room, holding the tray. I remember the quiet. The kind of quiet that feels different, even if you don't know why. I opened the door. What I saw is something that never left me. He was lying there, not moving. There was a knife in his chest. For a moment, my mind didn't understand what I was looking at. It didn't make sense. It felt like something impossible. Then it became real all at once. I was 9 years old. Everything after that feels blurred. Voices, movement, people rushing in, someone pulling me away. I don't remember all the details, but I remember the feeling. Shock, fear, confusion. A kind of silence inside me that I didn't have words for. Later, I heard bits and pieces about what had really happened the night of the accident. The truck driver, the one who caused the crash, was apparently doing something illegal. He was stealing from the company he worked for, or something like that. The adults didn't want me to hear too much about it at the time, so the story was never fully clear to me back then. But one thing was clear. None of it was my uncle's fault. And yet he believed it was. That belief stayed with him, stronger than anything anyone could say to change it. It followed him through his recovery, through his pain, Through every day, he tried to move forward. In the end, it was heavier than everything else, even now. And when I think about it, what stays with me the most isn't just what happened. It's how something like that can change a person completely. How someone can survive something so terrible, only to be lost in a different way. Sometimes I still remember that night before everything went wrong. The house full of people, the laughter, the noise, the feeling that everything was okay. And then I remember how quickly that feeling disappeared. It's strange how one moment can stay frozen in your mind, while everything that came after it feels like something you're still trying to understand. It's one of those memories that stays quiet for a long time and then comes back without warning. Not in a loud or dramatic way, but in small, uncomfortable pieces that slowly come together until you feel that same weight again. It's not just about what happened, but about what was said after, and what was never said at all. A week after my wife's sister had her baby, everything changed. I'll call her Jane. She was 35, healthy as far as anyone knew, and had just gone through something that should have been one of the happiest moments of her life. A new baby, a new beginning, a house filled with that kind of quiet excitement that comes with bringing a child home. For that first week, everything seemed normal from the outside. Family members visited, people brought food, there were messages and calls checking in. It was the usual pattern after a birth, the kind of thing that feels routine, even comforting. No one had any reason to think something was wrong. Jane was at home with her newborn, trying to settle into that new rhythm. Her husband had gone back to work, at least for part of the day, and her mother-in-law, who I'll call Betty, was staying with her to help out. It made sense. Having someone around during those first days can make things easier, especially with a newborn who wakes often, cries often, and depends on constant attention. The house itself wasn't unusual. It was just a normal place, quiet during the day, especially when the baby finally fell asleep. I imagine the kind of quiet that settles in after hours of small chaos, where even the smallest sound feels louder than it should. The kind of quiet where you expect everything to be okay because nothing seems out of place. But something was already wrong, even if no one understood it at the time. That day started like any other. There was nothing about it that stood out. No warning signs that anyone could point to later and say, that's when it began. It just moved forward like any normal day, slow and steady. At some point, Jane went to lie down. Maybe she was tired. Maybe she just needed a moment to rest while the baby slept. That kind of exhaustion is common after giving birth. Your body is still recovering, your sleep is broken, your mind is constantly alert. Rest becomes something you take whenever you can get it. Betty was in the house, going about her own routine. She had been there to help, to watch over things, to step in when needed. From what she later said, nothing seemed urgent in that moment. Then the baby started crying. That's normal. Newborns cry often, sometimes for no clear reason. It's one of those sounds that quickly fills a house, sharp and impossible to ignore. Betty heard it and went to check. She went into the room where Jane was lying in bed. What she saw didn't seem immediately alarming to her, at least not in the way it should have been. She said Jane was shaking slightly, moving in a way that didn't seem fully controlled. She was also making sounds, something like quiet, broken speech, like she was talking in her sleep or caught in some kind of dream. But Jane's eyes were closed. To Betty, it looked like a bad dream. That's what she told herself in that moment. People move when they dream. They mumble, they shift, they react to things that aren't really there. It can look strange if you catch it at the right moment. So she didn't think it was anything serious. She didn't try to wake her. She didn't call for help. Instead, she left the room. She went to take a shower. Time passed. It's hard to say exactly how long, but she later said it was about an hour. An hour can feel short or long, depending on what's happening. But in that situation, it was everything. At some point, the baby started crying again. That sound, sharp and constant, pulled her attention back. It was enough to make her go check again, the same way she had before. She went back into the room. But this time, everything was different. Jane wasn't moving. There was no shaking, no sound, no sign of any kind of response. The room, which had been quietly uneasy before, had become completely still. And in that stillness, something became clear. Jane was gone. What happened next is the part everyone knows. The calls, the panic, the rush of people, the arrival of emergency services. The kind of chaos that follows something unexpected and irreversible. It spreads quickly, touching everyone connected to it. The news reached the family and everything stopped. A week after giving birth, Jane had died in her own bed. The funeral came soon after. It was heavy, quiet, filled with the kind of grief that doesn't fully show itself at first. People moved through it like they were supposed to, saying the right things, standing where they needed to stand, but underneath it all, there was confusion. It didn't make sense. Someone that young, that recently full of life, just gone without warning. After the funeral, people gathered at my house, that's how it usually goes. After something like that, people don't want to be alone. They come together, sit in the same rooms, talk in low voices, or sometimes don't talk at all. It's a way of trying to make sense of something that doesn't have a clear explanation. Betty was there too. She had been drinking. More than usual, from what I could tell. She wasn't someone who needed much encouragement to drink. But that day, it seemed heavier. Maybe it was her way of dealing with what had happened. Maybe it was something else. As the night went on, she became more open. The kind of openness that comes with alcohol, where things that should stay quiet start to come out. At some point, she started talking about that day, not to everyone, just to me and my mother. Her voice was different, not exactly emotional, but not steady either. Like she was trying to explain something she hadn't fully processed herself. She told us about the baby crying, about going into the room, about seeing Jane shaking, hearing her speak in a broken, unclear way, and about thinking it was just a bad dream. She said it like it was something simple, like a decision that made sense in the moment. Then she told us she left. She went to take a shower. She said it without stopping, without really pausing to think about how it sounded. Then she told us about going back, about the baby crying again, about walking into the room and realizing that Jane was dead. There was something about the way she said it that made it feel heavier than the words themselves. Not just what happened, but the space between those moments. The hour that passed, the choice to leave, and I remember not knowing what to say. My mother didn't say much either. We just listened, because what could you say to that? From that moment on, that story stayed with me. Not just as something I heard, but as something I now knew. Something that sat quietly in the back of my mind, changing the way I saw what had happened. I never told my wife. I never told my brother-in-law. They lost someone they loved, someone who should have been there, raising her child, living her life. They already carried that loss, that confusion, that pain. Telling them what Betty said wouldn't bring Jane back. It wouldn't fix anything. It would only add something else, something heavier, something harder to live with. So I kept it to myself. Over time, life moved forward the way it always does. Slowly, unevenly, but forward. The baby grew. The family adjusted in the only way people can after something like that. They carried the loss, but they also found ways to keep going. But that story never really left me. Sometimes I think about that moment, about Jane lying in bed, her body trying to tell a story that no one understood, about how close help might have been, and how easily it slipped away. And I think about how some things are never meant to be shared, not because they don't matter, but because they matter too much. So it stays where it is, quiet, unspoken, but never gone. When I think back on that part of my life, it feels like something that happened to a different person. Not because I've forgotten it, but because it doesn't match who I am now. Back then, I was younger, confused, and trying to find a place where I felt like I belonged. I didn't really fit in anywhere, at least not in the normal way people expect. And when you feel like that, you can end up in places you shouldn't be, around people you don't fully understand. That's how I got mixed up with that group. At first, it didn't seem as serious as it really was. It started small, just being around them, hanging out, doing things that didn't feel too far out of line. But over time, things changed. The deeper I got into it, the more I realized this wasn't just a group of friends. There were rules, expectations, and lines you weren't supposed to cross. The guy who ran everything, he was the one I got closest to. I don't even know how to explain it properly. It wasn't just respect or fear. It felt more like loyalty, like a bond you don't question. He treated me better than anyone else had at that point in my life. He gave me food when I didn't have any, made sure I had a place to stay, helped me get out of situations I didn't think I could escape from. In a way, he pulled me out of a really bad place. And because of that, I stayed. Even when things started to feel wrong, even when I knew deep down this wasn't the life I wanted, I stayed because I felt like I owed him. And it's a strange kind of feeling, like you're trapped by gratitude. You tell yourself you can't leave because it would make you ungrateful, like you're betraying the person who helped you. But the truth is, that kind of debt never really ends. There's always something more. Another reason to stay. Another thing you owe. And in that world, once you're in, you're in. That's something everyone understands without needing it to be said out loud. Leaving isn't just walking away. It's something much bigger, something dangerous. For a long time, I ignored that feeling. I pushed it down and kept going, pretending everything was fine. But eventually, it got to a point where I couldn't do it anymore. I was tired. Not just physically, but mentally. I felt like I was losing myself, like every day I stayed, I was becoming someone I didn't want to be. So one night I told him. I told him I wanted out. I tried to explain it in the simplest way I could. I said I was tired, that I had stayed because I felt like I owed him. But I felt like I had paid that debt already. I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't argue. I just told him the truth. He didn't react much in that moment. He just listened. Later that night, he came to pick me up. I didn't want to go. Something felt off. I told him I was sick, that I didn't feel like going out. But he insisted. There was no real way to say no. Not in that situation. Not with him. When I got into the car, I noticed there were 3 other people with him. 2 in the back, 1 sitting in the passenger seat. I didn't know the guy in the front, and that alone made me uneasy. I sat in the back, in the middle, with someone on each side of me. It felt tight, like there was no space to move. As we started driving, I could feel something building inside me. Fear, maybe, or just a deep sense that something wasn't right. My mind kept running through every possible outcome, none of them good. He started talking. He talked about how we met, how things were back then, how he helped me. He reminded me of everything he had done for me, all the ways he had been there when no one else was. The way he said it wasn't aggressive, but it wasn't casual either. It felt like something more, like he was setting the tone for what was coming next. We kept driving until we pulled into an alley. It was quiet. Too quiet. He turned and looked at me, then asked if I still wanted to leave. In that moment, everything inside me was telling me to say no, to take it back, to tell him I didn't mean it, to just stay and avoid whatever was about to happen. But I didn't, even though I was scared, even though my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to burst. I said yes, and right after I said it, I heard the sound of the glove compartment opening. It was a small sound, but in that moment, it felt loud, final. My mind went blank. I didn't know what was about to happen, but I knew it wasn't good. Then he told me to get out of the car. We both stepped out and stood there in the alley. The others stayed inside, but I could feel their presence, like everything was focused on that moment. He looked at me differently then. Not like a boss, not like someone in control. More like someone who was about to say goodbye. He told me he was going to miss me. And that's when it hit me. All the fear, all the tension, everything I had been holding in just came out. I started crying right there in front of him. I didn't care how it looked. I didn't care about anything except the feeling that this might be the end. I was convinced I wasn't going to walk away from that alley. Then he stepped forward and hugged me. It caught me off guard. It wasn't what I expected at all. For a second, I didn't even react. I just stood there frozen. Then he leaned in slightly and told me to run. He said it quietly, but there was urgency in his voice. He told me not to look back, not to come back, to throw away my phone, not to go back to my apartment, and not to contact anyone. Then he handed me a thick roll of cash. And just like that, he turned around. I stood there for a second, not fully understanding what had just happened. It didn't feel real. It felt like I was stuck between two moments, not sure which one I was in. He got back into the car. Then something changed. The other people inside started to get out like they were about to follow me. But he yelled at them to get back in. His voice was different then, louder, sharper. Then he looked at me again and told me to start running. That snapped me out of it. I turned and ran. I'm not a runner. Never have been. I get tired easily, can't go far without stopping. But that night, none of that mattered. Adrenaline took over. Fear pushed me forward. I ran harder and farther than I ever had in my life. I didn't stop to think. I didn't stop to catch my breath. I just kept going, tears running down my face, my chest burning, my legs feeling like they were about to give out. Eventually, I made it to a truck stop. By then, I was completely exhausted. My clothes were soaked in sweat, my body shaking. I went straight into the bathroom and threw up. It lasted for several minutes. Everything I had been holding in, physically and emotionally, just came out. When I finally stepped out, there was an older man standing nearby. He looked at me and laughed a little, asking if I had too much to drink. I told him I didn't drink. Then he asked what I was coming down from, like it was some kind of joke. For some reason, I sat down next to him, and I started crying again. I don't know why I trusted him, or why I felt safe enough to sit there and break down in front of a stranger. Maybe it was because he was just there, and I needed someone to be there. He didn't ask too many questions after that. He just patted my back, like he understood that something was wrong without needing the details. I asked him if he could drive me to the nearest bus station. He agreed. That same night, I bought a ticket and left. I didn't go back. I didn't contact anyone from that life. I did exactly what he told me to do. Time passed. A year or so ago, out of curiosity, I looked some of those people up. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I just wanted to see what had happened after I left. That's when I found out about him. The guy who had saved me, the one who ran everything. He went missing about a week after I left. Not long after that, he was wanted for the murder of 3 people. When I saw the names, one of them stood out immediately. It was someone who had been in that car that night. Someone who was there, in that alley, when everything could have gone differently. I sat there for a long time after reading that, trying to understand it, trying to connect it all. And the only thing that made sense, the only thing that felt real was this. That night in the alley, when he told me to run, he wasn't just letting me go. He was making a choice. And whatever happened after that, whatever he became, whatever he did, I know that I'm only here because for one moment he chose not to let me be part of it. I still remember that day in a way that feels heavier than it should. Not because anything actually happened to me while I was out there, but because of what I heard and how it stayed with me long after I left. It changed something in the way I looked at everything around me, even though on the surface, nothing had really changed at all. At the time, I was in Cape Town, staying there for a while. It was one of those trips where you try to do everything right, see new places, enjoy the freedom of being somewhere different. The kind of experience people talk about when they say you should travel more. It felt like I was doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. Surfing became a big part of that. There's something about the ocean there that pulls you in. Even if you're not that skilled, you still feel connected to it. The waves, the open space, the sound of the water, it all creates this sense of freedom. When you're out there, it feels like everything else fades away. You stop thinking about the usual worries, and for a while, it's just you and the water. That day started like any other. I was with a friend who had been there longer than me. He knew the area well, knew where to go, what to watch out for, how things worked. Being with someone like that made everything feel easier. I didn't have to question much. I trusted him. And that trust made me feel safe in a place that wasn't actually familiar to me. The beach didn't stand out in any particular way. There were a few surfers already in the water, some people walking along the shore, others just sitting and watching the waves. It had that usual mix of locals and travelers. Nothing felt strange or out of place. It was just another normal day by the ocean. We spent some time in the water, catching waves, talking in between, just enjoying the moment. It was calm, steady, the kind of day where everything flows without effort. There was no tension, no sign that anything about that place had a different side to it. Eventually, we came back to shore and sat down for a bit, just resting, letting the water drip off, catching our breath. It felt like a pause, the kind you don't think much about at the time. That's when my friend started talking. He didn't make it sound like something important at first. It was casual, almost like he was just sharing something he had heard before. But there was something in his tone that made me pay attention. It wasn't dramatic, but it wasn't light either. He told me about something that had happened at that same spot not too long before. A guy had been there, just like us, surfing, enjoying the day. going through the same routine. He came out of the water, walked back to his car, probably thinking about what to do next. It was a normal moment, the kind you don't question. That's when someone approached him. A local man holding a gun. He told the surfer to hand over his money. It was quick, direct. The kind of situation where you don't get time to think things through. You react, you comply, you try to get out of it safely. But the surfer didn't have any money on him. And that's where things changed. Instead of ending there, the situation got worse. The man didn't leave. He told the surfer to get into the car, forced him to drive. What could have been a simple robbery turned into something much more serious, something that had already crossed the line. At some point, they were heading toward an ATM. That was the plan. But somewhere along the way, the surfer tried to fight back. Maybe he thought he had a chance. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe he just couldn't accept what was happening. Whatever the reason, it didn't go the way he wanted. He was shot. Not killed instantly, but badly hurt. Shot in the stomach. Enough to weaken him, enough to take away any real chance of escape. He was still alive, but barely holding on. And it still didn't end there. The attacker put him in the trunk of the car. Just like that. Hidden away, out of sight, injured and alone. But instead of going straight to an ATM or finishing what he started, the man did something that made the whole situation even harder to understand. He drove to a nearby neighborhood, picked up two girls he knew, people he was familiar with, people who got into the car without knowing what had already happened. To them, it probably seemed like a normal ride. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make them question anything. They drove around for a while, like it was just another day. Meanwhile, in the trunk, the surfer was still there. At some point, he made noise. Maybe he had been trying the whole time. Maybe he finally found the strength. But eventually, the girls heard it. They heard something coming from the back of the car. And that's when everything shifted again. They realized something was wrong. Not just slightly wrong, but completely wrong. Whatever they thought was happening before, whatever they believed about the situation, it changed in that moment. Fear replaced everything else. The attackers stopped the car, let them out, just told them to leave. And then he drove away again, alone, with the surfer still in the trunk. He went to a field somewhere nearby. Quiet, isolated, the kind of place where no one would notice anything unusual. The kind of place where things can happen without interruption. He took the surfer out. And then he poured petrol on him and set him on fire. My friend didn't rush through any part of the story. He spoke slowly, like it was something that had stayed with him too, like he had thought about it more than once. They never caught the man who did it. That part stayed with me just as much as the rest. There was no ending to the story in the way you expect. No arrest, no justice, and nothing that made it feel like it had been resolved. It just happened. And then life moved on. But even that wasn't the end of it. One of the girls, the first one, gave a statement to the police. She told them what she knew, what she had seen. For a moment, it seemed like maybe something would come from it, like there might be answers. Then she died. While in the police custody, there wasn't a clear explanation, nothing that made it make sense. The second girl disappeared. No one knew where she went. No one seemed to have any answers about that either. By the time my friend finished, everything around me felt different. The same beach, the same waves, the same cars parked along the side. But it didn't feel the same anymore. Before, it had felt open, calm, almost peaceful. Now it felt exposed. I started noticing things I hadn't paid attention to before. The distance between where we were and anything that felt safe. The fact that we were surrounded by open space with no real protection. The cars parked nearby, the people walking around, all of it looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. I realized how far away I was from home, from anything familiar, from anyone who could actually help if something went wrong. It hit me slowly, but deeply. Everything I had been doing, everything that felt normal, was built on an assumption that things would be fine, that nothing serious would happen, that I would be okay. But the truth was, I had no control over any of that. It was just luck. Luck that nothing had happened to me. Luck that I hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Luck that no one had chosen me. And the thought that stayed with me wasn't just about what happened to that surfer. It was about what would happen if it happened to me. Not just the moment itself, but everything after. The idea that even if I survived, even if I managed to get out somehow, there might not be anyone who could really help. That the systems you expect to protect you might not work the way you think they do. That realization didn't come all at once. It settled in slowly. And even now, when I think about that day, I don't remember it for the waves or the sun or the feeling of being in the water. I remember the story and how it changed everything around me without anything actually changing at all. It's one of those stories that doesn't feel real when you first hear it. Not because it sounds exaggerated, but because of how simple it starts compared to how dark it becomes. The kind of story that sits quietly in your mind and then slowly grows heavier the more you think about it. I heard it from an old coworker of mine. She wasn't someone who talked much about her past, at least not in detail. Most of what she shared came out in small pieces over time, never all at once. You could tell there were parts of her life she had learned to keep buried, or at least pushed far enough away that they didn't come up easily. She grew up during the final days of the Soviet Union. By the time she was old enough to remember things clearly, everything around her was already starting to fall apart. Systems were weakening. People were struggling. And for someone without family, it was even harder. She was an orphan. She lived in an orphanage from a very young age. The way she described it wasn't dramatic, but you could understand enough from what she didn't say. It wasn't a place filled with warmth or comfort. It was strict, quiet in a cold way, and the people there were more focused on control than care. Kindness wasn't something she experienced often. She was around 5 years old at the time this happened. At that age, children don't fully understand danger. They understand feelings more than anything else. Who is kind, who is not, who makes them feel safe, even if that feeling isn't real. She told me that she used to sneak out of the orphanage sometimes, not for any big reason, just to get away, to explore, to feel something different from the routine she was stuck in. It was risky, but to her, it probably felt like freedom. One day, during one of those times, she came across a man. There was nothing about him, at least from her perspective at the time, that seemed dangerous. He was friendly. That's the word she used. Friendly in a way she wasn't used to. He spoke to her kindly, didn't rush her, didn't scare her. For a child who hadn't experienced much kindness, that was enough. He asked her to come along with him, and she did. Not because she trusted him in the way adults understand trust, but because she didn't have any reason not to. To her, he was just someone who was being nice. They went somewhere far from where she had started. She didn't remember exact details about the place, only that it felt distant, quiet, away from everything else. She mentioned something about being near a lake, or at least a body of water. The kind of place where there aren't many people around, where the sounds don't carry far. They stayed there for some time. What she described next is what makes the whole story feel so unsettling. He wasn't threatening. He didn't act the way you would expect someone like that to act. Instead, he made a small fire. He had a guitar with him. He played music. He talked to her, laughed with her. At some point, she started singing. She said they even danced around the fire. To her, in that moment, it felt like something good, something warm, a memory that, if you removed everything else, could almost feel happy. And that's what makes it harder to process, because that moment existed alongside something much darker. At some point, people showed up. She wasn't sure exactly who they were at first. Police, or some kind of authorities. Adults who knew something was wrong. They came quickly, directly toward them, like they already knew where to go. They took the man, arrested him right there. She didn't fully understand what was happening at the time, not in the way an adult would. But she remembered enough of what was said afterward to piece things together later. The man wasn't just some stranger who had taken her away. He was a serial killer, someone who had hurt children before, someone who was known for being violent, for doing things that were hard to even describe. She told me that she was there when they questioned him, not in a formal setting, but close enough to hear parts of what was being said. She heard them ask him something that stayed with her. They asked him why he hadn't done anything to her yet, why he hadn't followed the same pattern he had with others. His answer was what made everything feel even more disturbing. He said it was because she wasn't afraid. He was used to fear. That was part of what drove him. The fear, the panic, the reaction. That's what he expected, what he relied on. But she hadn't shown any of that. To him, she had been different. Instead of fear, she had been open, trusting, even happy to be there. She had talked, laughed, sung with him, something he wasn't used to. And because of that, he didn't act the way he normally would. It wasn't that he had changed. It was just different. He said he didn't want to end it too quickly. That part stayed with me long after she told me the story, because it shows how close she was to something she didn't even understand at the time. She didn't escape because she made a smart decision. She didn't survive because she recognized danger and avoided it. She survived because of something unpredictable, something that doesn't make sense in a normal way. After that, she was taken back to the orphanage. Life continued, at least on the surface. But moments like that don't just disappear. Even if you don't fully understand them as a child, they stay somewhere inside you. As time went on, everything around her changed too. The dissolution of the Soviet Union happened, and the country she had grown up in no longer existed in the same way. Systems shifted, people moved, opportunities opened and closed all at once. Eventually, when she was older, she managed to leave. She made her way overseas and ended up in Canada, where I met her years later. By the time I knew her, she was just a normal person on the outside, working, living her life, doing what everyone else was doing. You wouldn't look at her and think about something like that happening in her past. But once she told me, it changed the way I saw her. Not in a negative way, but in a deeper one. It made me realize how many things people carry without showing them. How close someone can come to something terrible and still move forward, still build a life, still become someone who laughs and works and talks like anyone else. But it also left me with a different kind of thought. Not just about what happened to her, but about how easily things could have gone another way. how small the difference was between her story and a very different ending. And how sometimes survival doesn't come from strength or awareness. Sometimes it comes from something as simple and as strange as not being afraid. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survive things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.